Hi, my name is Natalie, and today I will be doing my presentation on mental disorders among sexual minorities. I chose to do this presentation because I myself am a sexual minority. I am bisexual, and I have also struggled with my fair share of mental disorders. And they namely started right around the time where I began my journey of self discovery relating to my sexuality and my gender. Um, so, sexual minorities include, but are not limited to, lesbians, bisexuals, pansexuals, and demisexuals. Again, these are not the only ones, these are just the ones I could list off the top of my head. And some contributing factors that associate sexual minorities with mental disorders are stress from societal pressures to behave according to societal norms. This includes the belief that males should be masculine and should be into things such as football and cars and very aggressive and dominating, and females should be very soft and dainty and submissive and into things like pink and Barbies and being very feminine. Um, there's also the sense of isolation and loneliness because you feel like you do not fit into these norms and you feel like you cannot relate to your peers, which is a very common feeling to experience because even though these are society's norms, most people do not fall into this binary and they do not solely identify with one or the other. There's typically a mix of all of these interests and hobbies because we are not limited to just these two things, as we can see, just merely based off of how many sexual identities there are. There's also the feeling of disapproval and disownment that can come from friends and families if they were to come out to them and they were to say, hey, like, I don't identify as heterosexual. Or maybe they already have come out and their families and friends have already chosen to disown them and to not associate themselves with them anymore. And that can be really detrimental to somebody's mental health and their well being because it creates a sense of, again, isolation and loneliness. In one study that was performed, there were tests done between sexual minorities and heterosexual young adults. So these were ranging in ages of about 16 to 26, I believe. And it was noted that sexual minorities reported higher levels of social anxiety as opposed to their heterosexual peers. This was to do with the fact that they felt that they had to conceal a part of themselves with other people around them because they didn't know who they could or couldn't be comfortable with and who they could or couldn't trust to make them feel safe. There were also higher levels of depression reported among lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, again, as opposed to their heterosexual peers. And this was because of the fact that they felt they were very alone in this struggle and that they didn't know um, how people were going to react, and maybe their families were not very supportive and understanding, and it creates this feeling of um, not being accepted by society and not being accepted by those you love, which can be really, really harmful to somebody's mental well-being as well. And this was also linked with the level of sexual concealment that each person went through and experienced and allowed themselves to have. And sexual concealment is basically just concealing one's sexuality, not being out, not being um, open with their peers about it for various reasons. Again, being their fear of being rejected, plus potential already having been rejected, and just feeling very, again, alone in this struggle and very misunderstood by their peers. It was also noted that young women across the board, both heterosexual and lesbian, bisexual, experienced higher levels of both social anxiety, social phobia, and depression amongst all other of their peers. So the highest recorded levels of depression and anxiety were noted in young lesbian or bisexual females, followed closely by young heterosexual females, then followed by young gay or bisexual males, and then followed by heterosexual males as well. And then these effects of mental disorders include falling behind academically, I think that is one of the biggest indicators of somebody struggling with mental health. It was certainly a big indicator of me starting to struggle with my mental health. So I can speak from personal experience that if you know what you are looking for, it is a really good indicator that somebody is struggling, especially when you know what they already are like with their academics. Another one can be struggling to interact with and relate to their peers. So, as they continue down this road of isolation and loneliness, they feel like they cannot talk to and cannot communicate with their peers. And this feeling of we don't understand each other and we don't get along and we have nothing in common just kind of builds. The isolation and loneliness again further drives this because they feel as though it's too late to reach out to somebody. There's nothing that can be done, that nobody would understand, that nobody would approve, that nobody would accept them, and it just further pushes them into these feelings. And last but certainly not least, of course, suicidal thoughts and tendencies. This is a really, really big one. This is something that we should be looking out for um, in every single person, but especially in those who already struggle with things that make them feel isolated and lonely, such as struggling with their sexual orientation, their gender identity, because there's already this barrier that's been created between them and the rest of their community. And it can further push them down this rabbit hole of nobody cares, of I'm better off not being here, and of it doesn't matter what I do because nobody around me loves me or accepts me, anyways, which is not true. You are loved, you are seen, and you are respected. And it is very important that we try to remember that even when we feel like we are alone in this world, because that is just not the truth. One more study also showed that there was a link between discrimination and substance abuse. um, Young gay men who experienced discrimination showed more likely chances of resorting to substance abuse as opposed to young gay men who had not experienced discrimination. Um, and it was also shown that young gay women who experienced discrimination suffered higher levels of mood disorders compared to those who hadn't. So, this is clearly two different ways to cope with discrimination. One is an externalization, such as the substance abuse that people tend to struggle with when they feel very isolated and alone from the rest of the world. And the other one being, of course, the mood disorders such as depression and anxiety that come with feeling, again, isolated and alone from the rest of the world because nobody seems to understand or accept. And these are all things that people namely struggle with. And let it be noted that I did mention isolation and loneliness quite a bit because that is quite a common feeling because most people do not just willingly go out and about and expose their sexuality for fear of being abused and mistreated and potentially in some extreme cases even killed for this for their sexual identity. So you tend to feel as though there's nobody else out there in the world who truly understands and who truly feels the way you do, and it can push you down a very dark path where you struggle with your mental illnesses, and sometimes it manifests itself in the form of substance abuse or your depression and anxiety. And it's important that we remember that we are not alone in these struggles and that we have people who do care about us and who do want to see us do well, because sometimes when you're in the midst of feeling this way and you feel lost, it's very hard to remember and it's very hard to even feel that that can be true. But it is. I know that was something I personally struggled with my sexuality, and my experience through that whole thing in high school. My friends were kind enough to be very accepting of me, my family, not so much. And it did create this sense of isolation amongst us. I, even to this day, I do not feel as close with my siblings as I once did because I feel as though there's a part of them that is still secretly wishing that I will come out and say I was just kidding. But I'm not. It's a part of who I am. It's a part of who you are, and it's a part of who we all are. And there's no shame, and there's no need to hide. Um, and it's okay because you are not alone in the struggle. Thank you so much. Um, thank you so much for listening.